Hi again. I'm going to take up the third issue in the 10-page letter that we sent, or we're going to send to the Watchtower Society. Remember, I'm reading a letter that David wrote, so it might not sound right, but you'll understand. The third issue: that our changes in doctrine, rather than exhibiting progressive light, show instead a pattern of random flip-flops and double reversals. Where that is not the case, many present teachings are completely opposite to those of Russell's day, even being rejected by him as Babylonish ideas. Vivian and I have spent hundreds of hours of research on this subject alone, and to fully document the results would take vast amounts of paper as well as time. Instead, we have broken down the findings into several charts, which, to the best of our present knowledge, accurately display the positions adopted by the organization on questions of doctrine and prophetic interpretation during the period of the Society's 4 presidents. Teachings are grouped into convenient categories, and the selection of teachings is determined by the material in C.T. Russell's Studies in the Scriptures, Millennial Dawn, which for 40 years served as the basic study and preaching tools used by the Society. A star following the doctrinal statement marks position taken by the Society in repudiation of Babylonish teachings of Christendom, which Babylonish doctrines we have later adopted as progressive light. This aspect is particularly embarrassing and distressing, as it means we must admit to opposers that Christendom had better light than the Society on many occasions. Abbreviated references are included on the charts, with a list of sources following. For reasons of space, only Studies in the Scriptures and Tabernacle Shadows are listed. Later publications, however, are utilized throughout the other documentation. The 1930-85 index will also prove helpful, as it has to us, in locating more recent references.
Issue number 4, that we are not preaching the gospel of the apostles, nor the kingdom of God, but instead a phantom kingdom of our own imagination. It is alleged that despite our continued stress on how much preaching the organization is doing, all such preaching work amounts to more to unlearn if the kingdom we are publicizing is counterfeit or unreal. That instead of preaching after the pattern of healthful words found in the apostles' message, that would be 2 Timothy 1:13, by the way, Acts chapters 2 and 3, or 1 Corinthians 1, we instead center our message on illusion, an invisible government, a presence of Christ, and a present generation, all 100 years old and still counting. Keep in mind this is 1987-88 when we wrote this. In addition, it is claimed that this illusion of urgency, of salvation always just ahead, is a blasphemous substitute for the true good news, eternal salvation that can be accepted now as the free gift of Jesus Christ. Whereas our sky is falling message will always bring deceiving temporary gains, both in zeal and numbers, the long-term result will inevitably be crushed hopes and shattered faith, as history records was the case in 1881, 1910, 1914, 1918, 1925, World War II, and 1975. Yet, worse, so goes the claim, while this good news continues to blind our eyes, the true gospel of Christ's cross, death, and resurrection must suffer neglect, even resulting in our everlasting loss.
Issue number 5, that we are guilty of dishonesty, or at least self-deception, in the way we present the organization's past. Example, concealing society's promotion of creature worship by promoting C.T. Russell as the faithful and discreet slave. This has been a particular disillusionment for Vivian and myself, as there seems to us no possible justification for how the history of the society is colored in recent literature. How could it be said of Russell that he never did claim to be the faithful and discreet slave, when the 1916 Watchtower, among many other publications, says the opposite? How could the fantastic claims made for Russell in the Finnish Mystery be so blithely passed over in their book called God's Kingdom of 1,000 Years Has Approached, and the poor reader of today be left to assume that creature worship was the fault of the People's Pulpit Association and many of his associates, when in actuality President J.F. Rutherford personally supervised the publishing of the 7th volume of the Studies in the Scriptures, it being subtitled Posthumous Work of Pastor Russell, His Last Legacy to the Dear Israel of God. The continued promotion of the Finnish Mystery and the published insistence that Russell was, without a doubt, the faithful and discreet slave certainly wasn't calculated to squash creature worship. Is it any wonder that so many old-timers, as Rutherford later so contemptuously referred to them, left the organization when the faithful and discreet slave was deposed and replaced in 1927? The sudden about-face as to the identity of the faithful and discreet slave arrived hand in hand with the disappointment over 1925. Again, brothers, why do the present publications give the unmistakable impression that the Friends were at fault here and expected too much? Why can we not just admit that it was President Rutherford who bore the blame for what he wrote in Millions Now Living Will Never Die?
Another stinging disillusionment. One call showed me photocopies of several editions of Russell's books in which the wording had been changed to cover up prophetic failures. Not wanting to accept this evidence, Vivian and I checked the original sources and found, to our extreme disappointment, that they had been changed. And there are many examples in the supporting material. What explanation can there be for this, brothers? If the society of 1914 to 1927 was capable of whitewashing its own history and changing the very writings of its recently deceased founder, need we add without his permission? After all, he died 10 years before. What credibility could its message possibly have with those alive during this period who had known the original writings? Considering the chain of prophetic misses, considering the subsequent cover-up, considering the 1925 fiasco, and considering finally the wild claims about Russell still being circulated by the millions in the Finnish Mystery and other publications, is it any wonder Christendom totally ignored the dire warnings and 7 bowls of the anger of God being dispensed by the Society from 1922 to 1928? And is it any less a wonder that those today outside the organization who have a knowledge of this history and who observe the organization's present distortion of history and shifting of blame judge our kingdom message as unworthy of serious consideration? Brothers, the great heart of God certainly can forgive these errors, but will even Jehovah forgive an attitude that reminds more of the Pharisee than the tax collector? I'm alluding here, of course, to Luke 18, the 2 men who went up to the temple. Perhaps you'll understand why Vivian and I find it impossible to publicly recommend the organization. What credibility do we have with those who are aware of these facts? We have met many already who have such information at their fingertips. Photocopies of the prophecies, contradictions, reversals, etc. And it seems that this awareness is growing rapidly. Additionally, what confidence can we impart to others that the organization has the truth about Jehovah when it either doesn't know or doesn't care to know the truth about its own past? Brothers, all these issues are grievous, but this one hurts most deeply. We can see no explanation, but await your comments. In the next segment, we'll take up the issue of exalting an organization and degrading Christ, therefore, and therefore being actually guilty of idolatry.